Good. Good morning, and welcome to the October 18th, 2018 meeting of the Architectural Review Board of the City of Palo Alto. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Firth.
Here.
Vice Chair Balte.
Present.
Board Member Thompson.
Present.
Board Member Guyer.
Here.
Board Member Liu.
Here.
All present. Thank you.
Thank you. Now is the time for oral communications from any member of the public wishing to speak on a matter not on our agenda, but within the scope of our responsibilities. I have no cards, and I see no members of the public who aren't affiliated with item 2, so we will note that. Any agenda changes, additions, or deletions, staff? ARB meeting schedule and attendance records, that's item 1.
Yes, so just on the schedule, we do have 2 subcommittee items
Yes.
after the hearing.
Yes.
And then you'll see for future agendas, we have the 3128 El Camino Real, which is exterior modifications to the McDonald's. That
Really?
will be going forward. And then we'll have a discussion on the comp plan policies as they relate to the ARB. And there's also one other project, 744 San Antonio. There's some minor revisions to the approved Marriott that will be coming to you. The wireless projects shown here are not quite ready, so those will come at a different day. Thank you.
Great. And do you have a tentative date for our discussion of ex parte communications?
I am still working with the attorneys, and I'll get you that date.
Thank you. All right, so we have meetings scheduled on November 15th, December 6th, and December 20th.
Sorry, what's the study for?
Ex parte communications, talking to people outside the board meetings about their projects that are coming before the board or are already being heard by the board. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. We have one full board public hearing item this morning. It concerns 1841 Page Mill Road, corner of Page Mill and, I guess, Junipero Serra turning into Foothill. It's quasi-judicial. It's a request for recommendation on the applicant's request for approval of a master sign program with sign exceptions to allow for new monument signs, directory signs, and directional signs. The applicant is Stanford University. The project is exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act. The zoning district is the Research Park. Mr. Sauls?
Thank you, Chair Firth. My name is Garrett Sauls. I've been working with the City of Palo Alto Planning Department with Corporate Sign Company on this application. This application is here before you today. It's at a roughly 10.5 acre site with about 185,000 square foot office and research and development park. The proposal is to improve and provide improvements to about 16 total signs on the site, as well as to modify an existing master sign program that they have from 2003. On those applications, there are 2 existing monument signs, one along Page Mill Road, the other along Porter Drive along the flagpole portion of the lot. There's one existing sign that has been approved through an exception on Page Mill Road that is adjacent to the vehicle entry sign. There are 7 directory signs located within the complex that will serve to identify the tenant locations at their building, at their respective buildings, and there are 6 directional wayfinding signs that they're looking to provide improvements for as well. The reason that we are here at the ARB for this application is that many of the signs that are proposed do not meet the sign code allowances. The challenges that really kind of impact this site is, given its size and nature, the sign code doesn't really accommodate for a lot of the signs that they're looking to do on the site that will provide more visibility for the tenants, as well as provide for a better ability to travel through the site and be more noticeable, have better vehicular wayfinding sign that'll be easier to direct visitors to the site throughout the site. Looking kind of the history of the site, back in 1985, the sign that was approved, the second tenant sign along Page Mill Road was originally approved in 1985. In 1994, the site received its first master sign program, and in 2003, they had modified that sign program to mostly what you're seeing here today in the packet. Looking at the site again, the biggest challenges, like I mentioned earlier, is that you have a very large site, and the sign code allows for monument signs only about 27 square feet with a height of 5 feet in total. That makes it very difficult for vehicles passing along Porter Drive and Page Mill Road to notice the signs at that site. In addition, a lot of the adjacent properties have around 2 to 3 different tenants located on the site, whereas this one has more than a handful. So fitting in all those different tenants on larger vehicular signs that are going to be visible from Page Mill Road and Porter Drive are going to be very challenging in order for those who are coming up to the site to actually be able to notice what tenants are located there. Some of the key considerations, again, is really just that the sign code, or the reason that they're really applying for this application is that they're doing a site-wide change with multiple tenants. Usually sign applications are respective to individual tenants, and in particular with this application, they're looking to exceed what is allowed within the municipal code for what you have in the sign code for directional signs, directory signs, and freestanding monument signs. The goal of what they're trying to establish here is to have a standardized height and dimensions for the sign, as well as to update the signage so that they can more accurately reflect some of the existing improvements that they're going to be doing on the site, to which the tenant and applicant can speak a little bit more to that. If you look here at the slides, you have some existing pictures of the site. Just kind of looking through, you see some of them, they vary in height and scale with what you have on the site today, and that makes it challenging for people driving through to try to notice where the signs are and where the tenant is located once they've gotten into the complex. Looking along here, this is additionally the sign that is along Page Mill Road. The second tenant sign, as you're driving up, doesn't really have a whole lot of conflicts as you're driving into the site in terms of like a line of sight as you're coming up to the turn-in. So it was important to kind of highlight some of the things that what they're doing is it's going to be very challenging to see as you're driving up. There's vegetation, there's a light pole, there's trees, there's also an electrical utilities box further down that really obscures the visibility of the sign that's being proposed today. Just kind of looking through, you have a little bit more examples of how the size of the signs don't necessarily scale appropriately to the building, and they're providing the new sign would at least serve to identify the tenant more easily. And ultimately, the recommendation from staff is to approve the application as has been proposed. Staff believes that the proposal does not, while it does exceed the sign code, it would more appropriately relate to the site as it has been, as again, it is a significantly large site, and what they have served to do is try to prevent more opportunities for people who are driving through the site to be able to notice the tenants, see where they're located at, and have better ability to understand which way to go. And that's it.
Are there questions of staff before we hear from the applicant? Alex?
Yes, first off, I have a question. My recollection is that Stanford doesn't allow wall signs in the research park, and if you could clarify that for me.
Yeah. So none of the applications have, or none of the signs proposed in the application are going to be any wall signs. The only signs that they have are lettering. So address labeling is all they're doing, and those generally aren't reviewed under a planning application.
And also to be clear that that's a Stanford policy, a landowner policy, but not a city regulation.
Thank you.
So if some of these, do they have unused wall sign allowances, or have they used up all their square footage no matter where they put the sign?
Thank you. They don't, from when I looked at the site the other day, I didn't see any wall signs existing on the site, and so they effectively would have allowable wall sign square footage to use. what they're proposing to do right now is just exceeding individually those allowances within the sign code. So for the freestanding signs and directory signs and directional signs, they're exceeding what is the allowable square footage for the area, and a number of them are exceeding the allowable height allowances. For directional and directory signs, there are no limitations indicated in the municipal code for how many signs there can be. Those ones are special purpose signs, so they have somewhat of a different allowance.
And how many extra square feet of signage, monument signage, are they asking for?
So looking at what they're proposing, the sign along Porter Drive is 60 square feet. That's the one along the flagpole portion of the lot.
Right.
So that is asking for 33 square foot additional. The one along Page Mill Road is 104 square feet. You can see in the packet also that they have existing signs that they are actually reducing in total size, mostly from what is being proposed. Looking at the tenant ID sign, they're looking to propose a 58 square foot sign, and what is allowed is a 27 square foot sign. In addition, given that they're modifying that existing exception, how we generally treat a modification to a non-conforming structure is that it is essentially a brand new structure. So they'd be getting an exception for having an additional sign along Page Mill Road, which would be modifying the existing exception, basically. For directory signs, you're allowed 4 square feet in area and 8 feet in height, and they're asking for 20 square feet. For directional signs, you're allowed 6 square feet and 3 feet in height, and they're asking for about a 7-foot tall wayfinding sign and a roughly 12 to 15 square foot directional sign based on how many panels are on those.
Thank you. May we hear from the applicant? You'll have 10 minutes to make your presentation. We won't start it till you've got your electronic materials up.
So hi, good morning. My name's Brian from Corporate Science Systems. We're the...
I'm sorry, Brian, we need your first and last names,
Sorry.
and we need the spelling for our transcriber.
All right, Brian Panyan, B-R-Y-A-N, last name P-A-N-I-A-N, with Corporate Science Systems. We're the contractor for the project. We're a design build shop out of Santa Clara. And I think that Garrett did a great job covering our goals. I want to have a brief presentation that really, first point before we even get into this is that what we're trying to do is modify existing. We're not building anything new, and in many cases we are asking for a slightly larger or even reducing square footage. The goal is to update these old dated signs to a more modern architectural sign appearance. We're trying to clean up and organize the layouts for better legibility and visibility, as Garrett said, for vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic. We're trying to justify the tenant names, enlarge the address so that it's more visible for, the purpose of these signs. We're trying to also create uniformity throughout the park. Many of these signs vary in size, height. We're trying to create a standard for the tenants so that everyone's sign is the same. Everybody, gets the same amount of square footage for their name. It's a little all over the place right now. We're trying to create a uniform appearance. And it's both for the wayfinding of the pedestrians and the vehicles. Right now, the wayfinding signs are little ground monument signs that point directions. We're trying to replace those with a pole sign that can point people in different directions throughout the property. And that gives us some flexibility. Rather than just a single face pointing left or right, we can use like a 4-axis system. And really, the whole goal is to updating the signage is one part in a larger effort to update and beautify the property. And after me, Michelle from Hudson will come and speak to the additional things that they're trying to do on the property, making updates for beautifying it. This is a quick rendering I had for the existing sign. This is the primary monument along Page Mill. The existing sign is at the top. This is sort of my Photoshop rendering of the intent for what the new sign would appear. And so you can sort of see how we're trying to increase the size of the address, justify the tenant names, so that they're more easily legible, readable, and just sort of clean it to a more updated and newer appearance. And this is an example of all of the signage throughout the property, the goal in general. That's really, I think, all that I have to say. You know, we provided our drawings. I hope that they speak for themselves. The goal, I'm sorry, do you have a question for me, or?
No, I was
Okay.
going to say, if that's the end of your presentation, if you'd stay there for just a minute, do any members of the board have questions? Board Member Thompson?
For your signage type item F, which is the 7-foot tall one,
Yes.
I see in the site plan that it's not in the path of travel necessarily, but will it be located? I just wanted to confirm if it's in the path of travel.
Yeah, those are next to all the walkways in the pedestrian. From the parking lot, it's on the main pathways into the buildings.
It is. So
Yes.
people would have to pass under them.
Well, it's going to be in the landscape, adjacent to, you know, the walkway or the sidewalk.
Okay.
And that was the reason for the 7-foot, is to allow any clearance in case there would be any, you know, nobody bumped their head on it.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be on or protruding into the walkway. It would be adjacent to, like, in the landscaping.
So the sign wouldn't, if there was,
You'd have to walk into the landscape to touch the sign or bump the sign. if you
sure,
were
but
going
the
to.
flag part that's rotated, that could potentially overhang onto the path of travel?
Well, we would orient it in a way that it wouldn't, you know.
Okay.
We can control the direction of them, and you can have it flag into the landscape but point the other direction
Okay,
with an arrow.
okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
It does.
We would be sure not to put the flags out into the walkway. Let's put it that way.
Okay, you can, but there are just height restrictions for that.
Okay.
Accessibility height restrictions.
Right.
We can talk about that later. And then the reflective white vinyl, that doesn't happen in your sign A or your sign B. I just want to confirm where that happens.
So our plan is also to update the accessible parking signs in the property, the handicap parking. And we pulled that from the package per Garrett's request, that it really didn't, you know, account for, or, you know, it's just updating a code sign. It's replacing existing, and it didn't count towards
don't
square
need to
footage or
review that,
anything. So
yes.
yeah, it didn't count. So it's called out still as a usage, but we pulled that page. So I'm sorry, it's a ghost sign in a
So
way.
the reflective white vinyl was only for the blue.
That's correct.
It's not used anywhere else?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was my confusion. Thank you.
Good morning.
Board Member Balte?
I don't see any provisions for lighting of these signs except what already exists on the site. I'm presuming that you're intending to leave the existing ground-mounted lights to illuminate these signs.
That's-
I'd like you to clarify and be really clear, are any of these signs internally illuminated?
None of the signs are internally illuminated, no.
And is there any change to the external illumination on the signs?
Not per my scope. Maybe Michelle can answer that. No. The plan is, yes, to reuse the existing ground illumination.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant? Does anybody else wish to speak?
Michelle? Okay, thank you.
You have 7 minutes.
Hi, I'm Michelle Hernandez, and it's M-I-C-H-E-L-L-E, Hernandez, H-E-R-N-A-N-D-E-Z. I'm with Hudson Pacific Properties. We manage the properties. I just wanted to explain that in addition to its directional signage, this is part of a huge enhancement project for the buildings and actually the project. I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what we have been doing and what we're going to continue doing, and this is part of the project. So we actually just did a renovation of the amenity area. We spent $2 million on that to enhance the properties. We just got approval to upgrade the landscaping area throughout the properties as well. And we are painting the exterior of the building as well. And then this is part of that project as well. So we're spending probably like over $3 million on enhancing the project. So this is in addition to that scope as well, as far as directional signage.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Hernandez? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll let you know if we have further questions as we discuss this. Commissioner Balte, Board Member Balte.
Thank you. For the staff, I wonder if you could clarify for us what the findings are we need to make for the sign exception. I just want to put it out there as we discuss this.
Thank you. So the finding number one for the exception is that there are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applicable to the property involved that do not apply generally to the property in the same district. What I'd indicated in that section was basically that given the size of the site and the number of tenants that are on the site, it'd be very challenging to really provide adequate signage that's going to both meet the sign code allowances as well as what the applicant is wanting to have. Do you have a question?
I'm just making sure I understand you clearly. You're saying that it's the number of tenants is why we would justify the finding?
The number of tenants as well as the size of the site based on what's allowed for the sign code, yes.
Okay, good, thanks.
The second finding is that the granting of the application is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of a substantial property right of the applicant and to prevent unreasonable property loss or unnecessary hardships. In that sense, again, it'd be very challenging for the applicant to meet the sign code allowances and still provide adequate visibility for their tenants as people are moving throughout the site, as well as to more adequately provide directional understanding of where to go. Like Brian had mentioned, it'd be very challenging. It gives them some flexibility with the new pole-mounted directional wayfinding signs to more adequately or correctly point in the direction where someone might need to go. And then the last finding is that the granting of the application will not be detrimental or injurious to property or improvements in the vicinity and will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, general welfare, or convenience. All the signs that are proposed are going to be on the owner's property, so there's not going to be anything that's going to be projecting onto any of the public right-of-way or anything that's going to be obstructing visibility as it's been proposed.
Thank you.
Okay. I would note that if you look at packet page 29, when these findings were made some years ago for the existing signs, it was noted, I'm sorry, it's page 28. It was also noted that this property is next to the Hetch Hetchy right-of-way, so it has no visibility on that side, on that frontage. Most corner lots have at least 2 frontages, which gives them more opportunity for signage under our code. But this one is hidden by a lot of oleanders or whatever it is they're planting out there these days. It's not oleanders, is it? Dense vegetation.
I just looked at it this morning. It's a very dense grove of oak trees.
Oh, sorry, I looked at it too, but I was not paying enough attention to the vegetation. Anyway, it's obscured. So you come around the corner and you come upon it very rapidly and you don't, really you don't even see the buildings. You don't even know there's going to be Page Mill Hill. I have a question for the applicants. Are you now de-emphasizing Page Mill Hill as the name of this parcel?
It is going to become a bit more of a just side note. As you can see, we're going to have a standard little branding, Page Mill Hill, that's almost like a footnote now. So I think that it becomes less premier as a title, if I'm right, Michelle? Yeah.
I'm asking because when you have a multi-tenant property like this, you can emphasize the name of the building, which is what you would do in a high-rise urban street. You know, you don't have every tenant. You got the Pan Am building or whatever. And so the address, you tell people to go to the Pan Am building. And you decided not to tell people to go to Page Mill Hill, that it's more effective to use addresses and names? Question?
We actually use Page Mill Hill. Yes, we do. We reference it as Page Mill Hill.
It's fine print now.
It is reduced in size, that's right. But it's still a branding deemed for the site, but maybe reduced from what's existing, yes.
But you do publicize the site as Page Mill Hill. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
You do publicize the site as Page Mill Hill?
Correct.
Thank you. Who would like to start? Well, go ahead, Pete. Well, I'll say something briefly, which is we have two issues before us. One is an aesthetic one concerning the design of your, primarily aesthetic, concerning the design of your proposed signs. And the other one is the request to allow exceptions from our existing code, which we're only allowed to do if we can make these findings, because the California courts have said otherwise we're being arbitrary and capricious and denying due process. So we need to take those findings seriously. Okay, who would like to begin? Robert.
Okay, this one is, I don't know, I was having I like the monument signs, or I should say they're a big improvement as to what you've got there, so I don't really have that much of a problem with those. I guess where I get bogged down a bit is there just seem to be so many of them. I mean, you've got areas for just to show an address. You've got you've got a 15 square foot sign that shows 5 addresses. To me, that just seems excessive. I mean, I understand you said it's a large property, but still, on the monument signs at the entry, I can see when you're driving down Page Mill, where you have to catch it, you have to, because you're looking for somebody. Once you're on the property, you pretty much know where you're going. So I don't see the need to have each individual address for it just have its own sign. I mean, once you're on the campus and you're doing 5 miles an hour, it's not like you have to quickly note what the address is. I just think it's overkill. And the exceptions, I mean, I don't know, the way they're written, they're just so vague. I have a hard time seeing the justification of those. So at this point, I'm a little up in the air. Like I said, I could accept the larger 2 monument signs, but the rest of it I have a problem with.
Alex.
So thank you for your presentation, and I did look at the site today. I think I do agree that the monument signs on Page Mill Road are really too low given that location and the speed of the traffic and the existing landscaping. So I can support a larger sign there. I think the design of the existing main primary monument sign is very difficult to read, and so I think that your proposed revision does help. In considering the exceptions, I did look at 1001 Page Mill Road, which is a comparable size site, and looked at how they broke up the address, like they just used one address for all 4 buildings on the site. So I did consider that as project and compare that to your project. I am willing to support the project and the exceptions. I think the language that staff have drafted here troubled me a little bit, and just one part of it, which is, I think, justifying it that the parcel is larger than the others. And when I looked at the zoning map, I saw lots of large parcels and parcels even larger. And so I think my inclination would be to use the old findings with the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, the dense planting of oak trees, and limited access points to the site as justifications for having the larger monument sign. The other signs, I don't feel, I think I'm not crazy about the directional signs, but they're internal to the site. I'm generally willing to support those. So that's all that I have on this particular one. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Balte.
Well, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. I concur with Alex's comments, and can support the project and make the necessary findings for it, including the design, sign enhancement exception. I had 3 items I'd make recommendations on because I think they're internal and small, but sign D6 is a numerical sign on the side of a building and specified to be 24-inch letters. I just don't think that fits. When I was out there, at least, I didn't see where it was going to go. Sign D,
Excuse me, too big or too small?
it's too big. The sign is, as I read your plans, D6 is listed at 24-inch tall letters, and I think it just doesn't fit. I thought 12 inches would fit. They have a spandrel panel there. It's about 15 inches tall, as best I can tell. So you may just want to check that. It doesn't really affect my ability to make the findings. Sign D4, that's on the canopy of what I'd call the back building, the one you approach from the flagpole. And there you're showing the letters on your drawing mounted above the canopy, and I thought they would be better below the canopy where they are currently, just be more visible. Again, it doesn't really affect my findings, but it's a recommendation. And the last one is sign D1. Again, it's numbers on the building to the left as you first enter from Page Mill, and they're listed at 18 inches, and again, they just seem too large. So it might be worth reviewing those things. Otherwise, I can vote to recommend approval. Thank you.
Board Member Thompson.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm mostly in concurrence with my fellow board members. Signs E and F that, because I did ask about sign F if it was in the path of travel. I noticed that E is also one of those that's sort of like a post with kind of these flags come out. As you have them drawn, they are not compliant for accessibility. You need at least 6'8" clear underneath the lowest flag for accessibility reasons. And then also the base needs to be high enough for cane detection. So as they are right now, they would not be okay. And I know it's not our job to check for accessibility, but these signs aren't typically supposed to be this tall from what I understand. So if you're going to make them tall, you have to make them compliant. So that was sort of the big outlier for me. And then I was worried about the contrast of the letters with the coloring, but if you're not using the white vinyl on the stainless, then I think you're fine. It's just black on the stainless. I think that's a good enough contrast. So I'd be willing to approve this so long as we make a condition that these also are accessible, but other than that, I have no other comments.
Thank you. I do think that thank you for your presentation, and I do think the new 1801, 1899 monument sign is a big improvement over what you have right now. It's much more visible. Do we have a new fire department regulation? Is that why we have great big numbers on buildings all over town now? Is that a public safety issue?
Yeah, so from what I've noticed in a lot of sign applications recently is that they are having larger address numbers on their sites, so I wouldn't be surprised that fires is having to make
Downtown, you
those
see a
larger.
lot of new signage.
And it is larger in its numbers on each building too, so it's not just one whole campus number.
So it is a complicated site plan. There was a time when law firms were seen as an unsuitable use for the research park, but that clearly is long gone. One of the things that I'm having trouble with is the relationship between the Gibson-Dunn sign and the numeric sign. Right now, I don't feel that they look as if they were planned at the same time or by the same person, and I don't see that improving a lot here. Do any of my colleagues have any thoughts on that? They're nodding their heads. I'm looking at sheet number 5. And I understand that you probably have a principal tenant who's entitled to their own sign, and I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with the relationship of these two signs. Is Gibson Dunn going to not appear then on the other sign? They're not one of the tenants listed in the directional sign?
They are. I believe that Like I say, we're updating existing, and so this one, the larger Gibson Dunn, is the premier
Right?
tenant sign.
They're your anchor tenant, they're your
Yes,
Macy's?
exactly. And then you're going to have one at their primary entry to the building that indicates, the smaller tenant. So when you're at their front door, this is the building that you're entering for Gibson Dunn.
But they won't be listed on the 1801, 1899 sign?
I see what you mean. I see, for like redundancy on that road. That's a good question. That is yet to be determined. You can...
All right. I think it's not really, I was curious, but I don't think, as presented, these signs match your intention to have an integrated sign program that shows that Page Mill Hill is a planned, thought-out, signed project. And I don't know what my colleagues might suggest, if they agree with my concern, as a way to remedy that. But it doesn't work now. Or what thoughts you might have, or why you did it the way you did it.
Can I ask, it seems to me that they're both on a stainless background with black letters of the same typeface, and the material underneath is a concrete base, is that right?
You mean the Page Mill letters, or, I'm sorry.
The two signs.
Signs A and B.
I'm not sure when I see such a big difference in design. They're clearly different signs, but to me, if the materials are identical...
But not really, because sign A, the 1801, for instance, is different than the D sign 1801. So they're not coordinated.
I think it has to do with the size of the typeface. I think it has to do with the design. Right now, they look really
It's piecemeal.
uncoordinated, and this design, I agree with you that it has materials that are the same, but it doesn't seem to have been designed by the same designer with the same assignment.
We are using a consistent font for the address numbers throughout. We do have consistent materials for the white concrete base, the stainless steel, a consistent color scheme.
It seems to me, looking at it, and I am the person up here with no design credentials, a really strong feature of your new monument sign is that white border on the left. And it's missing here, and I think this would work better if it had a white border or something.
I say, when the sign B, I think, is meant to coordinate with the C signs,
That's-
right? The tenant signs. And
but
I
it-
understand that
yeah.
there is an overlap, I get that.
Yeah.
The B is a larger C sign, I understand that.
But that's not what you experienced driving down Page Mill, and that's how this is going to be seen.
I think we go back to, I think there's an existing photo with both signs in perspective from the sidewalk.
I can pull that up real quick.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Liu's correct that it is D and C are more, or I'm sorry, B and C correlate. They're tenant signs, not really.
This is an extended version of C.
Correct, because it's your premier tenant. It's just an enlargement of
It's a
the
very
other.
distinguished law firm, I'm not
Yes.
arguing.
But I understand how you're saying it varies from the primary monument, but that is because
Considering how close they are to each other.
You see them at the same time as you drive down.
But what better relationship can you have if they're the same materials and the same font and the same lettering and the same massing?
The same design, I mean, you don't see the text when you start down. You see the relative presence of and shape of the signs. And I think this is the problem. It's an extended version of sign C instead of something that's designed, not just choice of materials and font in relationship to sign A, in my view.
Yeah, respectfully, when I don't see it. To me, if you started bringing the concrete up on one side or the other, giving it a slight asymmetry like the front, you're just being a little bit derivative. I mean, the monument sign is a lesser sign. It's still not as much design as the main entry sign, comparing A and B. What gave me pause when I was out there and thinking about all this is that the big monument sign on the road, sign B, is fully 15, 18 inches taller than what's there currently. And it does make it more dominant than the sign A1 or A2. And that gave me pause. I thought about it for quite a while, actually stood around and measured and looked, and my opinion was that driving down the road, the main entry sign was still the more dominant sign, which is as it should be. I recognize what she's saying. It could be slightly different, but I think it's fine, ultimately.
Any other comments? Does somebody?
I think that is a fair point that you bring up, Board Member Balte, that if you look at this view, as it exists currently, does the Gibson-Dunn Crutcher sign, is that currently taller than the entry, the sort of A sign replacement?
I'd say they're about the same right now. When I was walking around, they both come up, mid-chest height.
Would you agree with that, applicant? Brian?
Let me check. We've got the existing measurements. The Gibson is taller than the primary monument currently. However, if you look at our package for sign type A2, the primary monument, excuse me, the plan is to increase the height of the street-facing concrete to raise that up and make it more premier. We're going to build that concrete up. I'm looking at our page 11. And so we're going to go to a slightly higher. The Gibson is about 48 inches, and this would be about 50 inches on the street side. Because when you look at this, the primary monument is very low, and it's a slanted entry on the landscape. So the left side's much taller than the right side, deeper down, is much taller. But we're trying to bring the presence out closer to the street so that you do notice it as you're driving. That's where we want to put the large address numbers and bring the tenants out a little bit that way. So we're going to build that up. And the idea is to cut the concrete back, move everything up toward the street a little bit more, raise the concrete up so that it does become a little bit more premier than the Gibson-Dunn, so that you don't see the Gibson-Dunn as, oh, this is the premier, or this is the monument sign. It just becomes, this is maybe the primary tenant, whereas the monument stands out more to address the property as a whole.
Okay, and then the sign A replacement, that height is about the same?
That's correct, yeah.
So
Okay.
if I may, if you take a look at page 9, there are measurements for the existing and the proposed sign A. And also, if you take a look at page 12, then you'll see the measurements for sign B.
Wayne, if I could, perhaps something to address your concern, Roberts, is that the tenant monument sign B really should be about 12 or 18 inches lower. It should be really not taller than the primary.
Yeah, I mean, the
entry
reality of it is you've got 10 tenants on the primary sign A, yet the single premier tenant, if you want to call it, sign is bigger than the other one. I mean, that just seems overkill.
That was my first reaction looking at it. I just, thinking about it now and thinking about what Wynn was saying, by lowering it, you'll also enhance a horizontal proportion.
Plus, I mean,
which would
just
probably help tie these together from a design point.
Usually, let's face it, from a signage standpoint, the signage is designed to let people know where something is. And in most cases, you make it bigger because if someone's driving along and they're not sure they want to come into your store or your business or whatever the case is, they go, ooh, such and such, let's go there. This is a law office. I mean, you pretty much know you're going there. This is not a, hey, for the heck of it, let's just drop into the local law office and see what's going on. So, I mean, this just seems overkill also for the type of tenant that it is. And I mean, like I said, I like the initial sign, but this one is just way too big. And in fact, even the monument signs seem excessive. Again, like I said, you're on campus, you're doing 5 miles an hour. I don't think you need a monument sign for as you call it, a smaller tenant. That's why I said this whole thing just seems overkill.
You're right, and to address that is that we're not building new, we're just modifying existing. So for the Gibson Dunn sign, the idea was to pull that top off
Yeah,
and
well,
add
not
to it now.
building new could also mean you can trim down and, yeah.
Certainly, yes, and I agree with you, yes, definitely. So, if that would be a provision that you would allow, we'd be happy to do that. The idea or the intent was just to modify existing.
It's the same thing. Figure the, as you call it, the secondary sign is by proportion to the person next to it is like, almost 4 feet or high. That just seems awfully excessive, again, for, like I said, if you're driving 10 miles an hour between 4 buildings, or 4, a tiny little one, but for all intent and purposes, 4 buildings on campus, it just seems overkill to me.
And I'm sorry.
ahead.
I guess my comment to that is that there are those signs are already there, and so maybe it's already overkill, and really we're just trying to update, reface. We're not trying to add to those. We're just trying to update them, modify them.
Okay, so I think that
unify them.
I could say that I think that my colleagues' comments have helped me, because part of what bothers me is that this tenant sign is way too big compared to the Page Mill Hill sign. So if you reduce its height, and which will make it more horizontal, which will help with the proportions, because that's one of the things that's not very lovely right now, I would be happy.
If we said no more than 48 inches for all the signs B and C, that would change the proportion. Is there?
Yeah, I'd be willing to see something like for sign B, literally proportionately 2 sign Cs next to each other or something. So it's the same height, but it's twice as wide, or something of that nature. So it's still subservient to the A sign, which I think it should be.
If you just leave it no bigger than what's there now, it's now 48 inches at the high side.
Well, but I mean, you could change the style slightly, but to make it look like the new one. But yeah, something of the,
Well, the new design, except we're changing the 65-inch dimension to 48 inches.
Right.
And then you might as well do the same thing on the other C signs if you're trying to get
Oh, I
that
agree.
consistency.
I think those are excessive also.
One of them is 54, a couple of them are 48, but just do them a favor and say no more than 48 inches anywhere on signs B and
I
C.
think that'd be a big improvement.
I think that would work.
And that,
Would that work for the applicant?
yeah, and in a way, that is what we were trying to do with the sign type C. On our page 15, you can see one of the existing signs is 54 tall. We wanted to bring everything down to 48.
Okay.
Some are smaller, some are taller. We said, let's just cap it at 48, make them all the
We will fully support you in
same.
that effort, it looks like. Do we need to, it sounds like we have a consensus to approve with that condition and with slightly different findings. Do we need anything else about a redesign of sign EF to comply with the disability requirements? Accessibility requirements?
Accessibility, yeah. So, yeah, because finding number 3 discusses public
Right.
safety, welfare, and currently sign E does
Well,
not comply.
it's also, since you have caught it, I think staff wants to say something.
So if that's going to raise the total height of the sign, is that okay? Would just be the question. I mean, it will be caught by our building department ultimately. They'll ensure that it's ADA accessible. But if it raises up the whole sign, are we still okay with that?
Does that increase the nonconformity of the existing sign plan?
Yes, it will.
I mean, it's already 4 feet higher than what was allowed, so I guess
And
it would be-
what's our justification for these high signs under our code? And what's our justification for this? This isn't about visibility from the street on a difficult site. This is internal. Why can't they do conforming directional signs? That's not a rhetorical question. That's a question we have to answer in order to grant the exception.
The 3-foot tall sign that would be allowed would be very difficult to be seen as you're traveling through the site in a vehicle. As you're traveling through the site in a vehicle, having something that's a little taller up will be more appropriate in providing for better travel throughout the site.
Is this because of the grading, because of the way the parking lots are laid out? I mean, why doesn't everybody get a variance?
So the other thing to note is that the site gradually slopes away from Page Mill Road towards the adjacent properties. So as you're kind of going through, you're kind of driving in almost at an angle like so, rather than just kind of at a straight facing direction.
One thing I noticed is when you look at the parking lot, which is internal, the big sort of U-shaped parking lot, the visibility is terrible. I mean, it would be very confusing to try to figure out where to go. I don't think it was designed to have the principal access by strangers that way.
When I think to answer your question, I think it is the layout of the site. And I think that the code, the directional signs allowed by code, we see them elsewhere on the research park. It's basically, there's a very small sign that says like deliveries.
Yeah.
And that's all that they're trying to.
Because they don't want anybody on site.
Right. And I think that, anyway, but I think that the sign code doesn't really adjust a very complicated site like this. And it's come up before, say like at the shopping center. Like, how do you navigate to find the right store? So I think that there is a rationale for that.
Thank you.
And I think it also doesn't have to be for all signs. I think it just has to be the signs that intrude on the path of travel.
Okay.
So I think your sign rendering on page 18 might be okay. I mean, I'm not the building department, I can't say that, but it doesn't look like it's intruding on the path of travel, but in your site plan, you have a few in the parking lot where somebody can easily walk up to that, walk under it, and that would be a problem.
I think ideally it would be best to create uniformity, though, and consistency. Make them all ADA compliant, because that's the goal here. Rather than having varying heights, just create a standard so you're always looking where the sign
At
is.
the same place. That makes sense.
And to address Mr. Guri again, is that the directional signs will help declutter the park. Right now, there are ground directional signs that are less than 3 feet, that are rather large and bulky. The idea is maybe those are covered by landscape, difficult to see. The idea is to remove those and do a higher pole that is less obtrusive or
I
less.
don't mind them being off the ground a little bit. I understand you don't want them, a foot off the ground.
Yeah.
But it just seems like an excessive amount of space to show, 5 addresses.
I understand. And
And you could also, you could easily say 1841, 1881, 1891, 1, 2, 3 with one arrow or something. Rather than individuals placards for each one. That's what I was getting at, that it just seemed excessive in size, but it is an internal sign, so it...
Okay, yeah, that's where I end up too. Would somebody like to make a motion, or is there further discussion? Go for it, Alex.
Okay, I will make a motion that we recommend approval of the project to the planning director with the following requirements. One is that sign types B and C have a maximum height of 48 inches. That sign type, is it E? Is that this directional one?
It's E and F.
E and F. Meet the accessibility requirements for height clearance.
And cane detection.
And
And cane detection. As
Yes.
drawn, it doesn't meet the cane detection thing.
okay, thank you for that. And that we modify the findings. So we're going to say instead of, in the draft language for finding exception number 1, the language says the project parcel is exceptionally large in comparison to the other RP zone parcels surrounding the site, that we change that to be more similar to the language used in the existing finding, which references the Hetch Hetchy easement and the dense oak woodland landscaping on the Uniborough-Sarah frontage.
I will second that motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none? The project is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
No study session. The minutes were received so late that we will not try to act on them today. So that matter is continued. And we now have 2 subcommittee items. One of them is 2609 Alma Street, which is a review of aspects of a previously approved project. The second is 250 Sherman Avenue. So we will adjourn as a board, and I'm sorry, board, questions, comments, or announcements?
So I did want to announce that the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan met for the first time last night.
Yes.
They are going to have 2 community workshops next year for the broader public. And there are going to be 4 in-progress meetings with the council over the initial part of the plan to keep the council updated on that. And so there'll be lots of opportunities to hear what's going on. And there were lots of members of the public who are not on the committee who are interested in the project. And so there's pretty broad participation and interest in the project.
That's good news for all of us. We certainly hear from people in that neighborhood as we do this piece-by-piece review. Also, we received an invitation from VMware. Did you all get that? VMware?
Yes.
To a design workshop? What is it? I couldn't quite figure out what it was.
Yes, I got that too. I wasn't really sure where that was coming from.
Maybe
but
staff can give us some guidance. I'll send you the invitation.
Yeah.
It was sent to us as ARB members, at least some of us.
I did not get it.
We'll send it to you.
Maybe I can chime in one other thing of group interest, perhaps. I attended the preliminary hearing on 788
San Antonio
Road. It's a housing development. And I took away one thing that's not related to that project, but the council had a lot of discussion about parking and lift parking. And I heard a clear consensus from the council that stacking lift parking, things like that, shouldn't be considered for every parking use. They clearly said things we've been saying about the need for quick temporary parking, families with children coming home, not being able to use the stacker lifts. They were really questioning and probing on what was the appropriate use of those stackers, which is something we struggle with all the time. But I found it reassuring to hear them not saying stackers are perfect for every situation.
Thank you. When you said lift parking, I thought you meant as opposed to Uber drop-off.
So, board members, related to the VMware invitation, it looks like it's a community event that they're putting on November 1st. Innovations for Good, the Opportunity and Responsibility for Tech is the title of it. So just if people wanted to attend, we just need to make sure whether we have a quorum or not and all that.
There is an exception for one is allowed to attend meetings, have a majority of the board, but there are conditions under which you do it. So we should, if anybody's going to go, we should let staff know and be sure we know what those conditions are.
For staff, does VMware have any applications coming to the board? Is there anything in the works?
I believe they had some smaller revisions that came in, but I want to say they're approved, and I can double check that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Then the board as a whole is adjourned.